Well, I want to welcome everyone to this seminar, Engaging Our Grief and Finding Resilience. This seminar is sponsored by the Corinthian Plan, which is the healthcare plan Mennonite Church USA sponsors for pastors and church workers. My name is Duncan Smith. I'm the director of the Corinthian Plan for another 6 weeks or so. I'm really delighted to get this off the ground. This is the first one we've done exactly like this. So I'm glad that we can be able to offer this to the rest of the denomination and beyond, no matter where you're from. It's a 90-minute seminar. We will seek to be timely in closing it, but we will use up all of that space and encourage you to be comfortable, relax, find a good way to listen and reflect during this time and open yourself up. Let's open with a word of prayer. Gracious God, God of life, God of healing, we ask that you be with us during this time as we listen and consider the losses and grief in our own life, the way you're present, the way other people are present, and to learn from each other. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Thank you for that welcoming, Duncan. My name is Ingrid Friesen-Moser, and I'm the wellness coordinator for the Corinthian Plan. And I have done this role for 16 years. And I am looking forward to continuing to stay in this role. I am glad that you're here, whether it's good afternoon wherever you are or good evening. I know we span some time zones here across the country. The Corinthian Plan is definitely interested in being a resource for all of Mennonite Church USA, whether you're on the Corinthian Plan or not. And so we're glad that you're with us, whether you're a health plan member or not. And if you are a pastor that logs hours for some continuing education related activities, we hope that you might consider including this in those activities for your year. This is not an official CEU event, but we hope that you'll learn something of value for you in your ministry. If you're not a pastoral person, but just someone who's interested, we also hope that this will serve you well and be meaningful to you. We have another resource that you might want to be aware of, and that is our Cultivating Pastor Wellbeing checklist, and it's a tool for reflection and action in congregations. And you may have interest in that, and we'll put that in the chat for you if you would like to check it out. And if you want to know more, feel free to reach out to us. It's a way of just looking and reflecting on well-being activities in congregations and how we're supporting our pastoral people. I'd like to highlight just a few Zoom things for us as housekeeping details. Like Duncan said, we will be recording the webinar. We would like to make sure that your name is in the Zoom box the way you'd like it to appear, or if you would like us to call on you in a time of that we have for some participation, it's nice to have your name there in your Zoom box. And there will be a time where you can speak or share out responses. And so if you would like to do that, you could do it in a couple of ways. You can go to the React button in your toolbar with the heart, and there's a raised hand reaction emoji that you could use. And if you're not familiar with that, you might want to take a second to just locate that in your toolbar and find that raised hand emoji if you'd like us to call on you to speak out a response. But you can, and also be sure to unmute yourself and then mute yourself again when you're done. And if you would rather share in a way of putting something in the chat, that's fine. Duncan and I will be monitoring that and helping and put those responses into our collective experience here together. Specifically to Corinthian Plan health plan members, I'd like to just remind you that your well-being wellness incentive is still something that you can participate in for our cycle. The date is the end of February that you need to get those activities in. And I think Duncan will also put into the chat information with our website where you can go and learn more about your wellness incentives if you have that. It would be of interest to you to know that our two presenters today, Ann Blackwood and Ruth Johnston, are our two well-being conversations specialists, and they are people that if you have the incentive and you would like to earn the incentive, you can earn up to $150 by having a confidential conversation with one of them, and you can speak with them about any topic related to your well-being and health that you would like to. So that is a way of introducing them a little bit, but it also is a good lead in to them this evening, this afternoon. For our topic. So again, our topic is engaging our grief and finding resilience. And I'd like to turn the webinar over to Anne and Ruth at this time. We need you to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ingrid. By way of introduction, Ingrid already told you my name. I'm Anne Blackwood. I am a well-being specialist for the Mennonite Church. My original education and training is as a medical doctor. I practiced medical oncology on university faculty for a number of years before returning to seminary, both San Francisco Theological Seminary to study spiritual direction, and then Eastern Mennonite Seminary to study spiritual direction supervision. My role in the webinar this evening will be both encouraging your participation. If there are a few more people who'd like to turn on their cameras, I'd love to see your faces, though it's not absolutely necessary, certainly. Thank you. Um, and then also trying to engage you beyond intellectual understanding toward more spiritual and emotional integration. So we will have a few things that we hope will enable that. So webinar. Just to move that out of the way. So you know what this webinar is for, what it's about. I will lead us in an opening meditation. We'll do a little bit of brainstorming, I hope, on some of the sources of grief. Ruth will then present on understanding grief. We'll do some brainstorming about healthy ways to move through grief and do a deep dive into one in particular that we see many times throughout Scripture. Ruth will present on healthy ways to move through grief, and then I will lead us in the closing meditation. So this Psalm 4, is a psalm of lament. It is translated directly from the Hebrew, I should say adapted, because it's not a direct translation by Stephen Mitchell, excuse me. Psalm 4. Even in the midst of great pain, Lord, I praise you for that which is. I will not refuse this grief or close myself to this anguish. Let shallow men pray for ease. Comfort us, shield us from sorrow. I pray for whatever you send me and ask to receive it as your gift. You have put joy in my heart, greater than all the world's riches. I lie down, trusting the darkness, for I know that even now you are here. So I wonder if you would share with me what you think are some sources of grief. And they may be sources of personal grief, individual, or sources of grief for the world, because both can impact us very significantly. I won't be able to see you, but if you raise your hands, Ingrid or Duncan can call on you, or you can put things in the chat, and I will include them on the slides. Anyone? There's something in the chat. No, not yet. Feel free. I think it's a friendly crowd.
Uh, in the chat, death of a loved one.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
and David, would you want to unmute yourself and share? Can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Got it. I couldn't figure out how to get myself unmuted. Yeah, I would also add, so death of a loved one,
Mhm.
death of a pet.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Also in the chat, Miriam, loss loss of Mark last year, my significant other of 30 years.
Mm, I'm so sorry.
I
Yes.
see loss of a significant relationship,
hmm
chronic illness.
Absolutely. And what about grief for the world? Oh, we have
There was one more, Anne.
one
Death
more. Lovely.
another listing similar, death of a spouse.
hmm Yes, absolutely. What about um, grief for the world? What are some things that come up for you? One that occurs to me is division in a community, whether that's a close community or a broader community. Others that occur?
I'm seeing loss of natural habitats and favorite
Mm,
nature areas destroyed, extinction of species. I see immigrants.
Gaza and the West Bank.
mm.
Mm.
I missed a few that you said, Ingrid, I'm
Im-
sorry.
Immigrants, our
Mhm.
immigration crisis, systemic oppression,
Mm, yes.
Russia's war on the Ukraine,
Mm,
threats to our democracy.
I'm sorry, what did you say about our democracy?
The threats we have on our democracy right now.
Mm, yes, this is these are excellent lists.
I
And I
have,
oh,
oh,
one more? Mhm.
well, another personal grief is the loss of physical ability as we age, loss of
Mm,
memory, and another another grief for the world is social media in childhood.
mm, yes. What are they being exposed to? Mm.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for participating in this way. I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to try so that you can see Ruth and she can introduce herself before we go to her slides.
Need to unmute. Thank you, Anne. My name is Ruth Johnston, and I'll just briefly introduce myself. I have a history of having been a hospital chaplain, also a grief counselor for a large hospice, and I currently do some spiritual direction, and I'm also a well-being specialist for the Corinthian Plan. As we, Before we start, actually, I just want to say that, today as we come together, we're going to be talking a lot about grief. Um, I We don't know what is on the heart and mind of everybody who has gathered here today. So we just want to put out to you all that there is a national crisis hotline in case you or someone you care about is really in the middle of a grief crisis right now. That hotline is available 24/7 and it is free and it is confidential. And Duncan, I believe, is putting it into the chat so that you can get that information from there. It's basically the number 988. You can use your phone to talk with someone or text with someone, or you can get on the website and you can chat with someone. So there are several different ways of connecting through that. It's a great resource to have. And if we can go to slide 6. You all have done a really wonderful job um, with Anne coming up with a list of all kinds of losses and reasons that we often experience grief. And I also just want to talk about that as well, kind of types of losses. And of course, the first type is a person. So usually, when we think about grief, we are thinking about someone that is very close to us, someone beloved, a spouse, a family member, a good friend. Those are folks that we certainly grieve very deeply. There are also other ways that we sometimes grieve people. We can sometimes grieve folks in the culture, people who have been really important to us, whose work has been very meaningful to us. And when we see them die, when we lose them, that can be a very difficult thing. Another way is to see folks that we empathize with. Not long ago, there were children lost in a flood. We see people who might be caught in a mine, and we empathize with these folks, and it's hard to watch. We feel with them, and we can certainly experience grief in these kinds of situations. I just want to give a little aside here. Um, I'm going to be talking often about some experiences I've had as a grief counselor. So one of them was a young woman who was in college, and while she was away in college in the spring, her grandmother died, and she didn't get back home during that time, but she had just come back home in the summer, and she and I began to see each other. She began to come in. And one of her big pain points was that when she was at college, she would mention that she had just lost her grandmother. And what she found sometimes was that the response, even from a professor once, was kind of dismissive, like, well, it's your grandmother. People didn't assume that this was someone whose loss would really affect her. When in fact, her grandmother had lived with her family, they were very close. She said, I used to come home from middle school, and the only person there was grandmother, and we would sit and watch TV and eat snacks together. So this was a significant loss for her. And it was very painful to have folks sometimes dismiss it. And I learned in that conversation, maybe we know, but as a reminder that we can never look from the outside at a relationship and decide what the grief is going to be like for somebody. The only way we can know the depth of that grief is to ask them or to talk to them about it to find out. Um, so that is the kind of the type, which is grieving people. Another type is to grieve things that are material. People lose their house burns. They may lose a significant piece of work that they've done. There are lots of ways that we lose material things, and sometimes things that have a lot of meaning for us. maybe a piece of jewelry that has a lot of meaning. That's something that can also trigger grief. And then the third kind or type that I would mention is something that rarely gets a lot of airtime, but I think it's really important. And that is our identity, our dreams that we have for our lives, or concepts that we have either about ourselves or about the world. Um, we might have always thought a certain thing about ourselves, and then we kind of get tested in some fashion, and we realize maybe we aren't quite what we've thought we were. Or maybe we lose the chance for a role that we've long wanted, for instance, through infertility. Maybe we lose the role of being a spouse. There are all of these kinds of things. These things are a little more hidden, or they're just not maybe not so obvious to other people as far as losses go, but they can be very significant for us as we go through them. A lot of times when we think about grief, we think mostly about sadness, and for sure that is a big part of grief. But what I found was that grief is really a big mixture of feelings. I so often, yes, I saw sadness, rage, fear, anxiety, guilt, sometimes relief or some release, especially for people who had been caregivers for a long time, and tied into that role very, very tightly. It can bring about extreme tiredness and fatigue when we're in grief, and also fuzzy-headedness, being forgetful, unable to focus, and such. Grief can also be what we used to call complicated. Now it's called prolonged grief. And that is when it stays very intense for a long time. Generally, it's intensity that disrupts folks' ability to function in a normal way for at least 12 months or more. And when that happens, then oftentimes it's best for folks to get some professional help and kind of try to figure out what all might be playing into that's making it so hard to process this big change. So one of the kind of the grief experts out there is J. William Worden, Worden, and he came up with what's called the four tasks of grief. Thank you for that slide. Um, I'm going to be talking about his work, and I just want to make a mention of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who has long been seen as a grief guru. She did really important work, but her work was mostly with folks who were facing their own death, rather than folks who were left behind after someone died. So her work is just a little bit different than what we're talking about today. So I'm going to talk about these four tasks of grief that Worden has come up with. And one thing I want to emphasize is that these are not really in any particular order. I mean, I know they're written that they're written that way, and you might think as you read through that this is an order that makes some kind of sense. The thing is that we tend to go around and around. We go back through them. You may be in four and you find yourself back at one, and it just doesn't stay in this linear kind of order over time. But they're all important, and even as we circle back around, we never need to feel like, I mean, I think sometimes people think, oh, here I am back in one again, as if I haven't done any work. And that's not true. The work we do is always there. We just sometimes our minds have to go back and revisit different parts of these tasks of grief. So the first one is accepting the reality of the loss. And accepting the loss means that on an intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and physical basis, we face the truth that our loved one, if that's the loss, is gone. We don't avoid it or minimize it. Now, At the same time, we may search for ways to get some distraction from it. And I think that is absolutely fine. I think it's normal. I think it's actually good because grief it takes a toll, it is exhausting. And to find a distraction, for instance, a movie or going out with friends, something that takes our mind away just briefly is a way for us to rest. So I think that is absolutely fine. But overall, we are facing the truth of this. Um, One story that I will share is that I had a man who had lost his wife. And he was probably, I would say maybe 6 or 8 months out from that loss. And we were seeing each other, and he came in and told me that he and his wife used to go to this department store, and they would split up, and they would both shop, and they would find each other again in the shoe department. And he said to me, I hadn't been back there since she died, and I went back this last weekend. And after I'd been in there for a while, I went to the shoe department and I searched for her. And he was pretty upset about this. I mean, he felt like there was something wrong with him. And that is the kind of thing that's where you go back to number one again. It isn't, he knew she was gone, but we have to sometimes revisit that question. Our mind has to go back there and ask the question again and find the answer. And I heard that from many people who would tell me that they'd been in a crowd and they found themselves looking for their loved one's face. It's just a normal part of our grief. The second part is experience and process the pain of the grief. So, grief brings a mixture of feelings and it has its own timetable. I often heard people talk about it as like a roller coaster ride or riding big waves. The up at the top it was precarious, and down at the bottom it was dark and scary. I that goes on for a while, and sometimes then you start to move out of that, but you have days or moments where it comes back again. One thing I would say is that when we're grieving, tears are our friend. Finding a way to let yourself just allow the tears to come is very important. It carries out the work of our heart and our soul for us to let those tears come. And I really see that as a gift, them as a gift from God. I had a friend who was a chaplain who used to call tears sacred waters, and I think that's absolutely right. And, talking about grief is another important way to process it. Finding someone, a counselor or a trusted friend, someone that you can really acknowledge the reality, name it, reflect on it. And it also, by talking with someone, it helps us feel less alone. That's one of the byproducts of going through deep grief. Oftentimes, people feel very alone in it. So it's best to, if we can find some places where we can talk, that's helpful. The third is to adjust to a world without who or what has been lost. This is the third task of Worden. Um, when someone dies, we certainly lose that person and the characteristics of that person whom we love. But we also lose sometimes so many other things, our daily routine, our financial situation. We might lose some of our own beliefs or worldview as we've gone through the pain of it all. There are both internal and external changes that we have to navigate. And this is part of what becomes so exhausting. It takes time and it takes intentionality to work through the many changes that come up. But over time, we do begin to live into a new way of being. And so, number four, the fourth task is find enduring connections with who or what has been lost in the midst of embarking on a new chapter of life. So, over time, as we move back and forth through these four tasks, we do usually find space and energy and the ability to hold two things at once. The memories and the connection to this person that we've lost, and also the space and the room to continue living our life, continue meeting new people, and having new experiences. And again, there's no timetable for this. We honor and love we honor our loved one, and we honor our process, giving it the space and the time that it needs. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic of basically of what I was just talking about. So people tend to believe that our grief shrinks over time, somehow goes away. Um, you know, losing somebody you love, I mean, it never stops being the one fact in your life that you've lost someone you love. Um, what really happens, though, is that we grow around that grief, as I was just saying. So it continues to be there, and we continue to connect to it and remember. It continues to be part of us and part of our life journey. That doesn't go away or change, but we do begin at a certain point to be able to look into a future with new, more folks and experiences ahead of us. Next slide, please. Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It's an emotional, spiritual, and physical necessity, the price we pay for love. The only cure for grief is to grieve. This is from Earl Grolman, who was a pioneer in the study of death and dying. Just a word about resisting our grief, which, by the way, is quite common. There really are no shortcuts through grief. It's not a pathology. It's not something that can be fixed. If you are in grief, I can tell you that probably there will be some folks from the world, from our culture, who would love to fix you as soon as possible because it's hard for them to see the pain that you're in. And you yourself may wish for the same thing. Where, looking for some kind of fix for yourself because grief is not pleasant at all. When I was a grief counselor, I had a client who came in. She only came in one time, and she sat down in front of me and said, "Okay, what do I need? What do I need to do to get over this? Isn't that why I'm here?" And unfortunately, I did not have that answer for her because as far as I know, it doesn't exist. Grief counseling is a relationship, and it's an ongoing place where folks can share honestly and in safety, and be listened to. And I don't think that was what she was looking for, so we did not continue on. But in a way, I can understand her question. I mean, when I've been in grief, I've also thought, who can get me out of this? It's a question probably most of us ask at some point. Grief, it's often not well understood in our culture, and but it is normal and it's an essential part of life. And really, if you want to talk about pathology, only a person who has no love, no attachments, no bonds, no interdependency would never have grief. And that would be something that would be a problem. Next slide. So, just a little bit, I want to say a little bit about grief from pain in the world. First of all, if you're coping with a personal loss, as well as staying in touch with the pain of world events, then you are really dealing with a double whammy, especially right now. And it is permissible, and I would say even wise, to sometimes let go of our grief over the world, or at least limit our news watching, limit our time pondering media events, and praying about it, letting God watch over it while we spend some time attending to our own personal loss. To hold both of these things at one time is asking a lot, maybe too much. Now, for people who are not in the middle of a personal loss, what can we do with the grief that we have from watching the world? It's very similar to any kind of grief, to acknowledge and honor our grief and the pain, to attend to the brokenness in the world that we see and feel. It isn't very helpful to just push that down, just like any grief is generally trying to push it down, it will come back sideways or bigger. So finding a way to acknowledge it, journaling, making art, again, talking with someone that you trust about it, um, can be helpful. I do think that it's a time when we have to watch over ourselves a bit. We can't just take on everything that comes down the road toward us as far as grief goes. And it reminds me of what I would have conversations with folks who had just had a recent loss, and sometimes I would have folks say, "I'm thinking about getting into a grief support group," and I love grief support groups. I think they're great. Um, I think that's a very good resource. But for someone who has just had a significant loss, I would say to them, that is fine. I think it's a good thing to think about. But what you need to realize is when you go to a grief support group, you will not only have a chance to tell your story, you will be listening to the stories of everyone else in that room, the losses and the sadness and the struggles of those folks. There's a time in our grief when we're ready for that. There's a time when being it together with other people who are struggling in a similar way is helpful. We feel less alone. But there is a time when it's just too much. It's overwhelming. And I've had people say, "Oh no, I couldn't do that. That's not for me then." So it's about timing, recognizing how much bandwidth you have within yourself emotionally, and spiritually, to be careful about what you take in and and how you take care of yourself. And I also just want to say that, the suffering in the world, just like any loss or grief, is not something that we have control over or that we have wholesale responsibility for. For a lot of us who love this world, that is a very hard thing to accept. There's a terrible fear that if we let go of the reins for a moment, that somehow we're being irresponsible. In fact, holding the reins when it's sort of making us into a pretzel, trying to live through this is not helpful to us or the world, especially when we're coping with personal grief at the same time. So it's important to not let ourselves indulge in fantasies of having more power and control than we have, and yet doing what we can for ourselves to keep ourselves from being burned out or paralyzed, and doing what we can for the folks who are close to us, because we all deserve care when we're hurting. The world does as well, but we need to keep ourselves in a place of health and healing in order to be good for other people. And now I will hold it, or I will hand it back over to Anne. And I think you're muted.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. Um, so we're going to talk a little bit about lament, which is one healthy way of grieving. And we probably know about laments in biblical laments in the Psalms and the whole book of Lamentation and Jeremiah and some parts of it, Isaiah. I wonder how many of us actually have experience and awareness that we can write our own laments. And that is true whether it's a personal loss, if it's a loss in the world, even if it's a fear of loss. Um, when you read the Psalms, it's very clear that God holds a lot for God's beloved. So I'm just going to play a few minutes of this song of lament and ask you to think through some of what you are hearing in terms of movements within the lament. What are some of the things that the singer and presumably the songwriter is doing? Some of the things they are doing, excuse me. Thank you. So, what did you notice in that lament? I'm going to ask you, it looks like I went a slide ahead. Let's see if I can come off slideshow. There, I still went a slide ahead. Okay, so what are some of the movements that you noted? What are some of the things that the songwriter and that the singer did in engaging God in his deep sorrow? And in this case, I think it is primarily sorrow for the world. Anyone?
You can feel free to put things in the chat or you can raise your hand.
I'm not going to leave you out there. I do have a slide on that question, and it would be great to hear some of what you heard, some of what you noticed.
I'm seeing in the chat that the singer raised many questions to God.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel it? Have you
Mm-hmm.
turned your face away?
Mm-hmm. Right. Where are you? Do you feel it? Have you turned your face away? Yes. What do you think about coming to God with such bold questions? Anyone? Does that seem okay? Anything else you heard?
It's human nature to know God is there, but then also questioning if God is not.
Hmm.
Yes, to know God is there and to question whether perhaps God is not. What else did you notice? I'm sorry for the many typefaces here.
Mhm.
What else
Bold,
did you
bold questions remind me of Job and Tobit.
know? Questions like those of Job and Tobit.
Mhm.
And some of that questioning of God requires that we believe God, right? He also says, Holy God and holy man. And you can spell that WHO or as in entirely and HOL. So he recognizes who God is. He recognizes God's desire to be with him. And he goes back and forth in this experience of wondering and expressing to God, not simply to himself, but expressing to God um, his pain and his hope from God. Um, this is a list of Psalms of lament, both Psalms of individual lament and Psalms of collective lament. And in fact, there are more Psalms of lament than there are Psalms of praise. More Psalms of lament than Psalms of praise. This link, and you will get the slides, is a link to writing your own lament as a way of moving grief through you. Creativity is a wonderful way to move grief through you, and lament can be surprisingly freeing. If listening to others' laments feel like something that might be of value to you, here are some artists with songs focused on lament. I believe Bifrost Arts has a whole album on lament. Porter's Gate has a uh, CD on climate lament, etc. So additional resources. So what I heard was an expression of intention. So some requests for God to keep us soft, to help us mourn with those who mourn. An assertion of who God is known to be, holy God and holy man, right? Who walked among us? A cry, a plea for God's attention, an expression of fear and doubt. It is real. It is real when we are grieving. Deepening into the desire or intention, an acknowledgement again of the doubt, and then a more trusting request. So be with us today. Be with us today. And from the link that's on the prior slide, some more specifics, a simpler version for writing a lament turning. It's an address to God. It's not simply inward to our own thoughts. Complaining, humbly and honestly bringing questions and frustrations to God in an attempt to move closer to God. I need you, God. Asking a bold request. So the complaint is humble, the request is bold. Arise, help, rescue, fix, show justice, and then trust, an expression of trust or praise. The assumptions are that the man of sorrows, right, who walked among us, hears, understands, empathizes, and cares. He suffered, past tense, and suffers still, present tense. This is not a one-time event. That's the other assumption. We walk daily and may need frequent prayers and songs, even songs of lament to him. So what are some ways of facilitating healing of grief? We talked quite a bit about writing a lament. What else? What are some
And
things?
again, yeah, you can feel free to put things in the chat that you find um, meaningful or would like to share, or feel free to raise your hand.
Additional ways? Any thoughts? Or shall we just let uh, Ruth teach us on this? Yeah. If it's all right, Ruth.
There are a couple in the
Oh,
chat.
okay, lovely. I can't see the chat. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah,
No worries.
sharing grief stories with loved ones
Mm,
and physical activity like hiking, walking, cycling,
absolutely.
and creating art.
Yes. Yes, it may be that poetry or songwriting is not something you feel gifted in, and creating some other kind of art feels more healing to you.
I'm also seeing time in nature mentioned.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Nature can be very healing. Okay, I am going to turn it back over to Ruth to continue. Uh, did I go one too far? No. Okay. Go ahead, Ruth. You may be
Yes. Well, you
muted.
guys did a really good job of naming ways to work through grief. I want to just start with talking a little bit about guilt and regret. I mentioned it before, but it's something that frequently is a part of grief. I heard people talk about it quite a bit. Sometimes regrets are about mistakes that we made, and with folks, for instance, in caregiving. You know, I mean, we're all human and we make mistakes, and that can be a true thing. However, sometimes regret was just a general sense of I didn't do enough, never feeling settled or okay about their own role in caregiving or in just being with walking this journey with the person who died. Some of the things that I heard people say, my mom fell a week before she died. I should have been there to keep that from happening. I wish I would have visited my dad more often than I did. I got impatient with my spouse as they were losing function or memory. I should have been more compassionate. Or I saw my daughter suffer. I should have been able to protect her from that. And these reflect the mixed feelings we have, I think, about our own human limitations. Usually, in these situations, we've been thrust into these situations that we do not choose or want to be in. And we have a very highly developed sense of personal responsibility toward our loved ones. And at the same time, we're human beings with limitations. So I should have said as I started, I want to talk a little bit in this section about some active responses that we can make toward our grief in an effort to help us process it. And one of the things that we can do in this situation with guilt and regret is we can ask for forgiveness. Now, obviously, we can't do that face to face with our loved one anymore, but we could write a letter to them and really share our feelings of disappointment in ourselves in whatever way that comes. Um, we can also pray about this and ask God to forgive us. You know, whether we did something wrong or whether we just can't shake that feeling, we can ask for forgiveness either way. And then in the end, we have to allow ourselves to soften into that to that forgiveness and to loosen the grip we have, the anger we have toward ourselves. When we write a letter, we can burn it, let it go into the universe as smoke. We can put it in water and put it in a nearby river or creek and kind of let it go out into the world, into the universe, and hopefully into God's ears and our loved ones as well. Um, Another thing we can do if we're feeling regret or guilt is that, if this is especially true if it's something specific we feel like we didn't do well, is to decide we're going to make some changes going forward. So, for instance, if we feel like we didn't visit somebody as often as we should have, or we wished we had, then perhaps going forward, when someone in our family or an elderly neighbor if we did feel like we didn't visit enough, then we visit more. We kind of put more effort into that and make changes. Or if we feel like we lost our temper with our loved one, then maybe we start working on our own kind of reactivity um, toward family members, and we start a new practice of taking deep breaths before we respond to something that's upsetting. So that's another way we can go to take what we aren't happy with and make actual changes in as we go forward. I think as far as guilt and regret goes, as we look at grief about the world, the best way to address this is with some kind of action. We don't have to do everything. We don't have to be in every protest or give money to every cause, but doing something is good for the world and for ourselves. Nurturing love and wholeness in the world in some fashion, praying for our leaders, writing emails, taking food to neighbors, shaking hands with newcomers at church, anything that adds love and strength and wisdom to the world is is good for us. That action is good for our own heart and mind, and it is good for the world as well. And it helps us to keep from getting paralyzed in the midst of things that seem so overwhelming. So some other ways of, I mean, you guys did a great job of naming some of these, but I'll just go through them a little, maybe more briefly than I thought. But so some ways in which we can work with our grief. I think you will notice that all of the things I talk about in some way connect with the wisdom centers, our head, heart, and body. So reflection and expression. Oh, I should say next slide, please. Reflection and expression, obviously, talking with folks, making sense of what's going on, what we've experienced, and integrating our feelings and our experiences to talk with somebody that you can feel really safe with is a great way to go. Also, things that you mentioned, writing, using watercolors to paint our feelings in color, making collages from magazines. This was one of the things we did as grief counselors at the hospice. We had the setup for folks to make collages, and I loved using that. And a lot of my clients did as well. It was not about, fine art. It was just about processing your own feelings and, deciding what this is going to be about. There was one woman who made a collage that was about her grief and then her hope. And she came back to us and showed us that she had taken a picture of her collage and made it into a pillow through Shutterfly because she loved the symbolism that she had found in these pictures, and she wanted it to be close and available for her to see whenever she wanted. Um, it's when it comes to reflecting and expressing, it's really important to realize that it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to make intellectual sense. Allowing ourselves to listen to our intuition and our hearts can end up being a very healing thing for us. And just seeing where we're taken. What is it that draws us to it right now? Another way, somebody mentioned exercise. That's a great outlet for anxiety and depression and any intense feelings that we're holding on to. And another way that you can use physicality and creativity together. There was a grief center in the Twin Cities when I lived there. They had a program where folks who were grieving could come and they had all the makings for these simple birdhouses. So folks could come and make, and of course it was a grief center, so people who came were dealing with some kind of loss, and they would build these birdhouses together, and eventually, of course, begin to talk about what was going on in their lives. For some people to just sit across from somebody and talk about their feelings, it feels too uncomfortable to do that. So this is a way to be working with your hands, to be making something, and that in itself is a way to process your life as well. And sometimes people would end up making friends through this and getting coffee with, someone they met at the birdhouse workshop. So it turned into some good things. Another possibility is to create and perform a ritual. Rituals can be done in community. They can be done by yourself. Rituals have been found to be part of virtually every people group through a very long span of human history. Rituals, which use movement and images, uh, they they touch into our minds in a different way than language and sort of linear intellectual thought. And just to share a ritual I did, I was a hospital chaplain for 14 years, and then I moved over to become a hospice grief counselor. And about a year into that new job as a grief counselor, I began to realize I was still thinking about some pretty intense and traumatic moments I had in the hospital with folks. And I thought, I gotta see if there's something I can do about that. So I went to a friend's house. I was all alone, kind of had a little retreat by myself. And I decided to just longhand with paper and pen, just write as many really difficult situations that still were on my mind that I could easily bring up from my years in the hospital and just write them down, anything I wanted to. And then I decided, okay, I'm gonna just hand these people over. I mean, of course, some of these people I hadn't seen for years, but still they were on my mind. And I hand them over to God for God to care for them. And then at the end, I burned that paper outside. It happened to be snow on the ground, so it was safe. And um, I was amazed after, I had a prayer before I did that. Again, letting these folks, oh, giving these folks over to God, and so that I could let go and I could move on and continue to do more work with other people. So I was amazed afterward that that really worked. It ended up being um, very helpful to me to sort of start anew in a new position and have room again to sit with folks who were hurting. Next slide, please. Or not. That's fine. You can stay there. Um, No, actually, that is correct. Okay, so meditation and imagination are also avenues that can help us. And I'm just going to talk about a few different exercises that you can do. There's a breathing exercise where you breathe very deeply so that your whole abdomen moves, and you hold that breath for a count of 5 to 7. And then you let it go as slowly as you possibly can through your mouth. And that is really important, the through your mouth part, because if you let it go through your nose, you cannot really slow it down. You let it go through your mouth and you do it again. Big breath, hold 5 to 7, count, and then let it out as slowly as possible through your mouth. And you do it 3 to 5 times. And oftentimes there will be a very strong sense of relaxation after you've done this a number of times. Another thing that you can do is kind of a body scan where I usually start at my feet, start at your head or your feet. You think about a part of your body, you scrunch it, you tighten it, maybe th count 3 to 5 somewhere in there, and then you let it go and just let it relax. This is best done laying down, and you work your way up your whole body, your feet, legs, bottom, abdomen, all the way up to your head and face. And this is actually something that's really helpful if you're having ruminating thoughts. I have fallen asleep to this more than once. Woke up in the next morning and thought, "Oh, I got to my abdomen," and then I don't remember anything because it really does help you um, let go and relax. Um, Another exercise that uses mindfulness is intentionally paying attention to our five senses. So that this is one that really grounds us in the present and the here and now. Um, so you notice and you focus on five things that you see, four things you feel, three sounds you hear, two things you smell, and one thing that you taste. This also is very helpful with ruminating thoughts because it gets you out of your head into the place you are sitting. And the last way I will mention here is to sit with God, and imagine God sitting with you and the warmth of God, God's love, um, and presence, and God's love for you specifically, and God's love for the world. And just imagine God being there with you and not using a lot of words. It's more like a visit with God, a chance to just sit together. And you might say something simple like, God, I feel so sad today, something like that. But mostly not using a lot of words, more about feeling and imagining God's presence there with you, and then listening for what comes back from that, from God towards you. And I'm going to end here, and hand this over to Ingrid.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth, for that input, and Anne as well. We have some time for some questions. We have a final activity we want to close with, but we would have a few minutes here for questions. There was one in the chat that I noticed, and it was someone wondering around the theme of guilt and regret. So if you survive a trauma or a violent experience, and someone else did not. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, well, it's a common occurrence. It's called survivor's guilt, and I don't. I mean, I'm not a therapist. I don't know what treatment they might, what they would do to help you unpack that. So I would say going to talk with somebody
The therapy would
if
be
it's something that's continually stays with you and is um, disrupting your thoughts and your life. I would say, it's good to talk to somebody, a professional.
Mhm. Yes, Duncan.
Ruth, could you repeat the senses again? You said the five see, four feel. You went kind of quickly. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, let me find it here. Yes, it is five things you see, four things you feel, three sounds you hear, two things you can smell, and one thing you can taste.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
I wondered something actually, if I can ask a question too. Um, I was thinking about grief that's ongoing. Like, and maybe that's part of like this grief of the world or the grief of the things that we're experiencing um, happening around us. And it's not like a death of something where it's kind of a completed event, but when it's a continuing thing. Did you encounter any of that in your work, Ruth?
Um, the thing that comes to mind was a support group I was helping with for a while, that was for caregivers of folks who have chronic diseases, because that there are a lot of losses that along the way, but it's not, there's, it just goes on and it continues on and on. And so how to keep that, how to keep yourself up and keep yourself going and take care of yourself. Um, yeah, I mean, all I can really say is that folks who are in that situation need to find their areas of support, find their people. This is something I've been saying to myself and others as we're going through this time right now in the world. Find your people, find the substacks of with folks that, help you rise above this in some fashion, help you make sense out of things and become your best self. Because that, you're right, that kind of ongoing losses and grief that where there's, I mean, having a loss, the grief is still going to be ongoing, but the event is over basically. Um, but there are griefs that just the events go on and on and on. Um, yes, it's hard.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's helpful. I see you have your hand up, David. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, just to speak to that a little bit. I think I experienced that pretty significantly living in Northern Ireland during the Troubles for 10 years.
Mhm.
As the conflict, you were constantly living in the conflict, and every time there was another killing or somebody you knew was killed, you were constantly being re-traumatized every week.
Yeah.
And so you were never able to fully engage the full substance of what was lost earlier because you were.
Yeah.
And so once the troubles ended, there was just an overwhelming surge of trauma, people needing trauma support, and once the conflict ended. But I noticed the same thing in my pastoral work, like caring for, relating to and caring for people in the congregation who have ongoing illnesses. Like there's someone in our congregation who has MS, and you
Mhm.
see the losses just slowly coming to them, and you grieve each of those losses, but
Mhm.
ongoing. Or somebody in our congregation who's having, several times you've had members of the congregation losing their memory. And what struck me about that is they know they're losing their memory,
Mhm.
and they can articulate that they don't want to lose their memory and that sense of fear of losing their memory.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
and yeah, those are tough ones.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Are there other thoughts or questions that people are thinking? We have another minute.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for, David, did you have something additional?
I do want to say something else. This has been excellent. You guys have done a really excellent job. And I've just been taking notes furiously. And I really loved the way you talked about lament. And
Mm,
I, I don't know if it's possible to get notes from your talk because there was way more than I could write down fast enough.
yes, yes, we will PDF and share the slides. And thank you so much for the feedback. Um, we deeply desire that this is helpful to the members of the Corinthian plan and the members of the Mennonite Church more broadly. So thank you. I want to share with you a closing. Uh, Two pieces, one a poem and the other song again. And again, right, for a poem to touch you, you don't have to be its author. And if you are able to bring yourself to do some writing, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? You need not win a Nobel Prize for literature. It's the authenticity, it's the going to God, it's the seeing what is inside you that you may not have otherwise noticed. So this poem is actually from elsewhere in the monotheistic traditions. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's from Rumi, an ancient Persian poet, quite well known. And he talks about us, our being as a guest house for our emotions. And that may be helpful in terms of recognizing that emotions come and go, and also in terms of some recognition of potential learning from emotions. So the guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing. Invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And as we turn our attention back to song, let us end where we began, with Psalm 4, sung as the Psalms were sung in ancient Israel. And may the music and the words and the images infuse your souls. Amen. May it be true for you and for those about whom you care, however near or far they may be.
And thank you each for attending. Blessings as you go. And if you want to give us any feedback, please do. You can reach me at my email. So have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.